Today we have some more actual history about a pivotal battle in Texas, Mexican, and American history that occurred on April 21st, 1836. This was the Battle of San Jacinto, where the Texans decisively won their freedom from Santa Anna's tyrannical rule. We will hear a first-hand account of the battle given by Creed Taylor, who had just turned 16 years old 11 days before the battle. He dictated his account to James T. Deshields shortly before his death in 1906, and Deshields published it in this book in 1935. Tall Men with Long Rifles, the glamorous story of the Texas Revolution. So here is James T. Deshields' short introduction, followed by Creed Taylor's account of the Battle of San Jacinto. This chapter is titled, The Greatest Day in Texas History. The most glorious and far-reaching event in Texas history is the Battle of San Jacinto, one of the shortest, sharpest, and most decisive battles of the world. One historian calls it 15 minutes of destiny, and so it was. The word Jacinto is the Spanish word for hyacinth, and it is strange that in seeking for an emblematic flower, the patriotic Texas women of a later time did not choose that blossom as the one and only fitting symbol of heroic Texas. The Battle of San Jacinto has been, by men who never venture beyond the surface of thought, spoken of in terms of derision and contempt. They have measured its dignity and importance by the numbers engaged and the casualties of the conflict. But the philosophic student of history does not measure the importance of battles by such standards. Judged in its true light, history attests that San Jacinto was the most important and decisive military engagement which has been fought on this continent since Cornwallis surrendered on the plains of Yorktown. One feature of the Battle of San Jacinto has never been stressed to the extent it deserves. Taking the battles of the world and averaging the casualties, it will be found that the proportion of wounded to killed is about 3 or 4 to 1. And many great battles have lasted all day, and even for 2 or 3 days, thus reversing the usual proportion. There is no precedent for such fatality as resulted at San Jacinto in all the records of history. That undisciplined, ununiformed little army of frontiersmen set a standard of deadly battle, which remains as yet without a parallel in the annals of history. Every school child in Texas and in all America knows something about San Jacinto and Sam Houston. Many graphic accounts of the battle have been written. Orators on patriotic Texas themes always reach their climax with the great victory. Poets have sung of its valorous deeds, and artists have attempted to paint its dramatic scenes. The most intimate accounts of this extraordinary affair have come to us from actual participants and eyewitnesses. Few of the early Texas soldiers, however, were men of letters. They were fighters, more adept with the rifle than with the pen. For one thing, every soldier regarded the occasion of that day as a most serious one. The author has conversed with scores of San Jacinto men, and not one ever spoke jestingly of the incidents of that engagement. All felt that it was to be a struggle in which they would win or die. One of the most intimate and illuminating narratives that has come down to us is that of the noted old Texas soldier, Creed Taylor, who gives a vivid picture of the incidents occurring on that eventful day of April 21st, 1836. He says, "The morning of April 21st dawned bright and crisp. It was to be a great day for Texas. From their crude pallets the boys sprang up as if for a joyous holiday. Merry jest went the rounds, and the camp wit spared neither high private nor officers. 'If you get bumped off, Bill, won't you will me your coonskin cap?' Tomlinson said to a comrade. 'You can take the cap now. I'll wear a Mexican officer's hat on parade tomorrow,' rejoined the confident comrade. And he was as good as his word, for he did wear a dead Mexican officer's uniform the next day. The night preceding the battle was a restless one for many of the boys, but General Houston slept soundly, as if nothing out of the ordinary was to take place on the morrow. As the first beams of the morning sun touched his eyelids, he rose from his blanket, walked to the bay nearby, and bathed his face. At the moment, a raven was seen flying across the field from the direction of the Mexican camp, interpreted by Houston as a good omen, heralding the dawn of the natal day of free Texas. The day was to be a memorable one in the history of Texas, and a most eventful one in the life of Sam Houston. More than 20 years before, as a young ensign, Houston led his men over the breastworks of a savage foe at Tohopeka, to win his first laurels as a soldier, but at the cost of severe wounds. Today he would lead his men over the breastworks of another equally bloodthirsty enemy, to win great military renown, and added wounds. As the forenoon wore away, the hilarity subsided, giving place to anxiety and impatience. The boys expected to be led into battle at an early hour. Why this delay? 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock came, and no forward movement. During the noon hour, however, a number of officers approached General Houston, where he was reclining under a tree. I was not close enough to hear what was said, but observed by their gestures that some of them were intensely excited. I saw Houston rise up and, with vehement motions of his clenched fists, address the party. Pretty soon the leather-faced old scout, Deaf Smith, with Jim Reeves, Mose Lapham, and one or two others, rode up to the general's headquarters, and after a short conversation dashed away at full speed. No one knew their orders or destination, but all knew that something was going to happen soon, and the excitement was at high pitch. And here is opportunity to correct another error that has crept into history, to the effect that General Houston suggested the destruction of Vince's Bridge. That idea was first advanced by John Coker, a private in the Cavalry Corps, and in this way. As he was talking with a group of his comrades about reinforcements reaching the enemy, he remarked that the destruction of the bridge over Vince's Bayou, some 8 miles west of the camp, would halt their advance. All agreed that the idea was a wise one, and Deaf Smith was suggested to place the matter before General Houston. The general thought the suggestion a good one, and ordered Smith to select a few trusty helpers, evade the enemy, and proceed at once to the crossing and destroy the bridge. The structure was not chopped down, as stated by some of our historians, but was fired and burned away. A larger force would have been required to cut down the massive and lengthy structure in so short a time. Santa Anna himself states that in his attempt to escape, his flight was halted when he found the bridge over the bayou was burned. Private John Coker should have credit for suggesting the burning of Vince's Bridge. As Scout Smith and his little party dashed away, the excitement increased. As the boys began to gather about headquarters, the general mounted his horse, which stood saddled nearby, and made a short speech, telling them to prepare to fight, that they were brave soldiers and would win the battle, and all would be captains, that the enemy was hemmed in and could not escape or receive reinforcements, as Vince's Bridge was being destroyed, but that it would take some tall fighting to whip them. Remember, my boys, a favorite expression with the general, you are fighting for Texas and your loved ones, to avenge the inhuman butchery of your friends and comrades at the Alamo and at Goliad. The spirits of these brave men call to us for revenge. Remember your wives and little children who are now in flight to escape the fury of the ruthless invaders. The red-handed warlord Santa Anna having boasted he would pursue and annihilate the rebel Texans, and then wash his hands of their blood in the Sabine. The time and the situation is here, and we will win if everyone does his duty. We must win or die. Let us fight fast and hard. This was the trend of the talk the general made as he rode among us with uplifted sword, frequently pointing towards the enemy's camp. And it certainly inspired and nerved everyone to a high pitch, and everyone was ready and anxious for the struggle. Going into battle, of course, carries serious feelings for most men, but I know that I was not scared. I thought only of fighting, and I believe every man was anxious for the fray. Somehow I felt that we would win. When our line was formed and just before the order to advance was given, I looked up and down the ranks to see if anyone looked scared. The boys had remarked about the nervous state of mind of some of the officers, and some believed them unduly excited. As I looked into the faces of these men, I could see no signs of uneasiness. On the contrary, there was a spirit of cheerfulness and levity that was remarkable under such conditions. Captain Carnes did not dismount and walk excitedly back and forth before his company, as has been reported. He sat during the few minutes we remained in line on his horse, directly in front of us, and replied in his own dry, droll way to the jest of his men in the ranks. The order was then given by the company leaders to arm and line. As the different companies formed and were drawn up, they were briefly addressed by their respective captains. I remember hearing Mosley Baker as he harangued his men in loud, unmistakable terms. The speech attracted the attention of General Houston as he rode up and down the lines, and he halted and sat quietly on his horse, listening interestedly and approvingly. Captain Baker told his men neither to ask for nor to give quarter, that now was the chance to even up the scores, and avenge the murder of their comrades at San Antonio and Goliad. And as a reminder, he proposed that the company carry a red flag. This met with approval, and a large red handkerchief was hoisted on a pole and carried into battle. Engrossed in the movements of my own company, I noticed but little of the formation and movements of the other bodies of troops, except those under Colonel Ed Burleson, which took place in front of our camp. They stood rank and file 2 deep, and I well remember seeing the colonel mounted on a large bay horse, riding up and down in front of the line as he addressed his men. But evidently he did not need to encourage them, for they seemed only too eager for action, swaying forward and out of line at points where the under-officers were not holding them back by the flat part of their swords. Once again I noticed Colonel Burleson just before the yell was raised to charge, and as he galloped over for some purpose to Sherman's line. As he dashed back across the plain, his blue flannel shirt fluttering in the breeze, and his sword glistening in the sun, the spectacle was truly inspiring, and we could not help cheering him. He was the picture of a real military hero. All, of course, noticed Colonel Sherman as he dashed about, wearing his bright blue silver-laced uniform. He was the only one thus supplied. Even General Houston did not have a complete uniform. Just then General Houston and 2 or 3 officers came along the line, and our captain turned his horse and rode out a few steps to meet them. They did not halt, but Houston said something to Carnes, and I heard the captain reply, "Depend on that, General." Houston had not gone far down the line when I saw him rein his horse, turn to the men, draw his sword, and point towards the Mexican encampments. Immediately came the command, "Forward, my brave men! Charge the enemy and give them hell!" At last we were really going into battle. We did not go off in a helter-skelter charge, as I have often heard related, but our gait for a short distance was a trot, our speed increasing as we neared the enemy. The music by which we marched upon the foe was the then familiar and popular melody, "Will You Come to the Bower I Have Shaded for You," and was played on a single fife and a badly battered drum. Here it might be added that except for the time when General Havelock marched to the relief of Lucknow to the music of Annie Laurie, this was, so far as I know, the only time in history where troops were led into the battle to the strains of a love song. One thing I particularly observed as the lines first moved forward to the attack. Our artillery, 2 small brass cannon, the famous Twin Sisters, were drawn by horses. But when near the enemy, the horses became excited and unmanageable, and the guns were drawn by men, 2 of whom I remember well, Clark Harmon and Tom Green. Both were powerful men. I have often heard Green, who later, by the way, became a famous Confederate general, tell how sore it made his muscles to yank the cannon around. Green and Harmon were the principal gunners. Ben McCulloch, afterwards a noted border chief and a gallant Confederate general, was in command of the guns. Young McCulloch, fresh from Tennessee, had arrived in Texas a little too late to join his neighbor Davy Crockett in the Alamo, but he attached himself to Houston's army to avenge, he said, his friend's tragic death. And he did so, for the Twin Sisters spoke mid the rifle's sharp crack, the clashing of swords and the yell, of men who fought on but never turned back, till the battle was won and won well. As we came in full view of the Mexican breastworks, the music changed to the lively strains of Yankee Doodle. But just at the moment something occurred far more inspiring and thrilling. Mud-spattered and on foaming steed, the heroic Deaf Smith dashed up and along the lines, frantically waving an axe above his head, and shouted, "Vince's Bridge is gone! No escape, boys! Fight fast and hard!" And then wheeling, the gallant old scout ran ahead and over the barricade. His horse, exhausted, stumbled and fell, throwing the rider among the enemy. Smith quickly arose and, drawing his pistol, attempted to shoot a Mexican who was about to run him through with a bayonet. For once the scout's trusty pistol failed to fire, but he hurled the weapon at the head of his assailant. As the stunned Mexican staggered back, Smith seized his gun and dispatched him. So, if it is worth anything to history, I can vouch for the fact that Deaf Smith began the fight, and drew the first blood at San Jacinto. The Texan Yell was the order to charge, and like a cyclone crashing through the forest, we went over the dirt and brush barricade without halting. A solid sheet of flame flashed from our rifles, and then, without waiting to reload, we bore down and closed in upon the surprised and frightened enemy, with clubbed guns, pistols, and hunting knives. It was a hand-to-hand struggle. And now came the blood-stirring cry, "Remember the Alamo! Remember Goliad!" Instantly the appeal was caught up and repeated with more and more feeling. It seemed to nerve every Texan to fight with greater desperation, and to fire with deadlier effect. It is little wonder that Santa Anna, attempting to excuse himself for his inglorious flight from the field, afterwards wrote, "So sudden and fierce was the enemy's charge, that the earth seemed to move and tremble. Just inside the breastworks my horse fell, and I thought he was shot, but he quickly regained his feet, and after reloading my gun I mounted and dashed on into the thick of the fray. At this moment I saw Carnes kill a Mexican with his pistol, and then throw the discharged weapon at another, knocking him over. As the Mexican was trying to scramble up, he was struck over the head with a rifle and killed. When I speak particularly of Carnes' company, as I could not see what was going on with the others, crossed the breastworks, all company formation and order was at an end. Every man was his own captain, fighting his own way with only one aim, to kill Mexicans. Orders given by commanding officers were drowned in the noise or little heeded. In fact, but little semblance of order existed after the fight began. It seemed that every fighter was transformed into a wild, furious beast, with but one impulse, and that to slay. "No me mates, do not kill me," was heard on every side, but our men gave no heed to these appeals. They used their heavy sheath knives with deadly effect. Some used their guns as they would a club. The Mexican guns had bayonets, and these were seized in many instances, and the Mexicans were run through with their own weapons. From the first onslaught the fight was fast and furious, and what a terrible scene! The yells of the infuriated Texans, the shouts of the confused Mexicans, and the crack of firearms making a veritable bedlam. Many of the terror-stricken Mexicans simply threw down their arms and begged for mercy. "Me no Alamo, me no Goliad," was heard on every hand, but the appeals of the poor fellows were in vain. The slaughter went on with relentless fury. During the progress of the struggle, many acts of individual heroism and gallantry were displayed, and for one thing it can be said that not one gesture of cowardice was displayed by a San Jacinto man. Dr. Motley, a young surgeon on Houston's staff, was about the first of our boys to fall. After receiving his death wound and with his dying breath, he cheered his comrades on. This gallant martyr to Texan liberty was one of the first signers of our Declaration of Independence, and his memory is perpetuated in the name of one of the counties of Texas. Perhaps the most conspicuous figure in the fight was the dauntless Captain Ware and his heroic band of 18 select riflemen from the San Bernard. They were well to the front and under close fire, suffering more than some of the larger companies. One of the number, George A. Lamb, was killed, and 4 others, Sergeants Will Winters and Albert Gallatin, and Privates Rector and Robinson, wounded. The ball which hit Gallatin first struck his powder horn, cutting through the shot pouch and entering the side, carrying the strap of leather into the wound. Captain Ware was wild and furious, and when the charge was ordered he leaped to his place in front and shouted, "Come on, boys!" It was almost a miracle that none of the balls hit the captain, for he was in the lead, standing in his stirrups, springing into the air and shouting at every jump. From the moment we set up our yell and opened fire, there was consternation in the Mexican camp. The enemy was completely surprised. Most of the officers evidently were asleep, as some of them were found shot while they reposed on their cots, and it was apparent that the Mexican soldiers were just preparing their evening meal, as their tables were left spread when the assault came. It was about 4 o'clock, and to add to their confusion, the western sun was shining directly in the enemy's face. General Houston had said he purposely had timed the attack so the sun would be in the Mexicans' eyes. But the Mexicans were not cowards, and for a time fought desperately. However, as the onslaught increased and the Texans became more desperate, the foe lost spirit and fell back, finally running toward the center of their encampment, where their brave officers tried to rally them to their colors. It was here, in his heroic efforts to rally his troops, that the brave Colonel Castrillion fell. But the rush was too fast for the Mexicans to escape the fury of the Diablos Tejanos, Texas Devils. Our men were avenging their friends at the Alamo and at Goliad, and everyone was determined to take full toll. The Mexican artillery was soon silenced. It was around the artillery park that the fiercest fighting and most desperate hand-to-hand struggles occurred. In fact, the greater number of the enemy were killed around their cannon. I could have walked over a large circle of their dead bodies. Here in this bloody angle the struggle was terrific, the Texans using their heavy hunting knives as cleavers, or wielding their guns as clubs to knock out the brains of the Mexicans. Here was the bloodiest battle scene on all the field. And now presented an exciting scene. In the midst of the melee and when the fighting was fiercest, I heard someone shout, Look, look, yonder goes old Santa. He's running away. Let's catch him. Looking across the prairie, I saw a small body of gaily uniformed horsemen riding rapidly from the field. It was the Mexican chief and his bodyguard who, realizing that all was lost, was seeking safety in wild flights. It was the terrifying Texan Yell and the headlong charges of our cavalry that so frightened the Mexicans and put them into wild flights. On our right, the glorious Lamar commanded the cavalry and performed many acts of heroism, charging down upon the enemy and driving them before him. With him were such intrepid fighters as Walter P. Lane, Deaf Smith, Henry Carnes, Peter H. Bell, Wash Seacrest, and Olin Trask, as brave and determined men as ever rode in line of battle. His position brought him in front of Santa Anna, and it was the desperate charge of Lamar that caused the Mexican general to abandon his army and flee for life. Santa Anna was mounted on a coal-black charger, which later proved to be the noted Old Whip, Alan Vince's fine stallion stolen by the Mexicans the day before. A few of Lamar's cavalrymen at once gave chase, and soon the escort was overtaken and slain. But Santa Anna, being mounted on a swift steed, outdistanced his pursuers. Reaching the bayou and finding the bridge gone, he plunged himself into the mire, and was unable to extricate himself. But the fugitive Napoleon of the West managed to scramble out, and hid in the brush and high grass bordering the stream until night. Thus, afoot and bewildered, he wandered around, but made little further progress toward escape. The manner in which he was captured the next day by a party of our scouts will be told at another time. Once the order to charge was given and the furious fight began, all semblance of order had ceased. The respective commanders were simply unable to direct or control their men. Even the commander-in-chief himself was virtually as a private. Although wounded early in the action, the ball shattering his ankle and penetrating his horse, General Houston displayed unusual bravery and calmness throughout. As he rode here and there encouraging the men and endeavoring to direct operations, his wounded horse, covered with foam and blood, finally fell. But the general quickly remounted another and spurred forward into the thick of the fray, shouting, "Come on, my brave fellows, your general leads you." Houston's enemies accused him of cowardice at San Jacinto, that he was unduly excited, and that he became a hero by accident. I observed the general on the field several times during the fight, and I can say truthfully that in every instance and in every way, he appeared cool and collected. I can never forget his magnificent and commanding appearance as he dashed from point to point over the field. He certainly looked and acted every inch a military chieftain. It was the great Napoleon, I believe, who said, "Quarter hours decide the destinies of nations." And so it was at San Jacinto. The battle was soon won, but the slaughter continued in the different directions until it was quite dark. It is said that the battle lasted only 15 or 20 minutes. It seemed longer than that to me, but admitting the statement to be true, one can form some idea of the desperation of the boys when he considers the number killed in that brief time. General Almonte rallied a considerable number of his fleeing men and surrendered. These would have been killed had not our officers prevented their slaughter. They used every means to stop the killing of the panic-stricken and fleeing Mexicans, but it was some time before the men gave any heed to their commanders. When the firing did cease, our boys were wild with delight. General Houston rode over the field with blood dripping from his stirrup, and tried to establish order by urging the men to get into line and fall back to camp. But he only met with good-natured raillery, whereup the general is said to have exclaimed, "Boys, I like your courage, but damn your manners." Finally, a semblance of order was established, and the men began to perform the duties assigned to them, caring for the wounded, collecting the guns, ammunition, and camp equipage left strewn about the field. Dead Mexicans lay everywhere and in every direction, some officers on their cots, enlisted men lay dead across the campfires, slain while preparing the evening meal. It was a gruesome scene I can never forget. The dead Mexicans were not buried. Santa Anna evinced no desire to have that done, but allowed them to remain where they had fallen. The Mexican prisoners were gathered together and placed under guard around a big campfire. A guard was placed around Santa Anna's tent, where the army chest was found. General Houston had all monies found turned in, and it was then equally divided among the boys. But the men were so joyful over the great victory that they cared but little for the spoils. The murder of their friends had been avenged, and Texas was free from tyrannical rule. Among other things discovered in the Mexican camp was a great quantity of tallow candles, which were brought out and distributed among the men. The old fife and drum again played Will You Come to the Bower, and lighting their candles, the boys began a wild dance, each holding in his hand a blazing candle as he sang, yelled, and whirled around the big campfire. They were intoxicated with the joy of victory, and kept up the revelry until a late hour. From the clear sky of that eventful night, the stars actually seemed to shine brighter, as if taking cognizance of what had transpired. The strife is o'er, the fight is done, the field is gained, the battle won. The close of day, the set of sun, sees Texas free, her race begun. The Lone Star of Texas arose in dim luster at Washington town, March 2nd, 1836. San Jacinto gave it effulgence, to shine with increasing radiance as the years roll by. It is the star of empire. So that's it for this episode, which will be released around the time of yet another anniversary of the victory at San Jacinto and the independence of Texas as a free country. This account was given by Creed Taylor, who at just 16 years old was one of the youngest soldiers in the Texas Army. He had been at the Battle of Gonzales, where the Come and Take It flag was raised, as well as at several other battles. He had only met up with the Army the day before the Battle of San Jacinto. We will hear what happened to Santa Anna in the next episode on this channel. In the 2 final chapters of this book, Creed Taylor describes the aftermath of San Jacinto, and how he was among the Texas Rangers who went to the Alamo in early 1837, and discovered the aftermath of that bloody scene. Creed Taylor made sure to note that it was John Coker who came up with the idea of burning Vince's Bridge, which prevented the Mexicans, including Santa Anna, from escaping. Coker was about 46 years old at the time of this battle. He was 4 years older than Sam Houston. Coker settled the community of Coker, Texas with his headright claim. This community is now within the limits of San Antonio in north-central Bexar County. One soldier who fought in the Battle of San Jacinto that day was John Hallett Jr. He was my third great-granduncle. He was with a group of volunteers from Lavaca County, near present-day Hallettsville. However, he would be killed by Indians near San Antonio the very next year in 1837. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that has been cast aside as unworthy to discuss on history channels on TV. Here on this channel, our mission is to keep this worthy history of our ancestors alive by reading directly from old books. If you'd like to support the mission of our channel, then you can join our Patreon page or become a YouTube channel member. Members will have full access to all of our members-only videos, and your contribution will be recognized at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.